My name is Shadley Gray. I am part of the AMI team. We've been doing this webinar since February of this year. It's very exciting to bring on guest speakers and learn all kinds of interesting things. I'm particularly interested in today's conversation because when I was at BABA last year, the BABA Summit, which side note is coming up in a couple weeks, and I'm hoping to see a bunch of you there. Please come up and say hello. I will be running around with everyone from AMI. When I was at the event last year, one of my takeaways that I talked to Drew about after the event was the number of people or conversations I was a part of where people mentioned being introverts and that it was a little bit overwhelming, the scope of everything and the amount of networking and everything that happened at BABA can be overwhelming for people that are introverts, that of which many creative people are. And so I thought one of the things I told Drew is that I thought it would be cool to address that and to talk to people who were introverts about how to thrive in this very demanding industry, which expects you to be out and about, to be the face of a company. And so I'm coincidentally, about a month after I was at BABA last year, I was at a event in my hometown in Des Moines and saw that Alexson was actually speaking on this exact topic. And so I went up to her afterwards and said, I am fascinated by the work that you're doing. And I'm very curious to stay in touch. And when we launched this webinar series, Alexson was the first person. Alexson, am I right? I'm struggling with this name repeatedly.
You're not alone. It's okay.
um, yes. So when we started this webinar, Alexson was the first person I reached out to because I wanted her to be part of this conversation because I thought it was a topic that a lot of people would be interested in that I had come across at BABA last year. And being an introvert myself, I thought it was just a fascinating and important conversation. I will turn things over now to Alexson to introduce herself a little bit more and kick off the presentation. So again, thank you
Awesome.
for joining us.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for that. Like Shadley said, we're going to talk about public relations for introverts today. And my hope is that you'll get some tools that will be useful to you at your upcoming conference, as well as just kind of broader picture as you step into being the face of your company, because I know it's not always the most comfortable. So what we're going to talk through a little bit today is some basics about what public relations is and what it isn't. We're going to talk about the benefits of building messaging libraries, which I think is a particularly useful tool for people who are introverts. We're going to talk about some pitching strategies that we can use when we are approaching media. And we're going to talk about leveraging one win into many, because if there's one thing introverts like, it's being able to recycle all of the times that we sound amazing so that we don't have to use up the energy to do it as often. To introduce myself, like Shadley said, my name's Alexson Calahan. I run a company called Small Adventures Communications, and we do public relations for small businesses and large public health nonprofit organizations. And I've been doing this work for about 20 years, run my business for 3.5. And in the past 20 years, I've seen over and over again the power of public relations. Working with the American Heart Association, I've seen it raise millions of dollars. I've seen it, change legislation. I've seen it change people's health behavior, bring new donors and sponsors to the table. And now in my role as a business owner and counseling other clients, like I want to be able to harness this power for myself, right? And for other introverted business owners, because we can shine. I think a lot of times our extroverted friends are the ones, raising their hands and stepping forward and being very loud. But I believe that when introverts harness the power of public relations, we can share our gifts with the world in a way that feels comfortable. It doesn't always have to be icky. It doesn't always have to be a big spotlight on you. That's a core belief that I have. So we'll talk more about that today. And I also believe and leveraging everything that we've got, leveraging all of our strengths that we have as introverted individuals, leveraging all of the tools that we have just at our disposal, and leveraging every win into many more wins. So I want you to imagine that you are sitting at your desk and an email comes across that is asking for a quote from you as a subject matter expert in your industry about some news that's whatever's relevant to your organization. But the broadcast team is going to be at your office in about an hour for this interview. I would love to see, you can drop it in the chat. What's your first thought?
Mine would probably be a curse word, but that would yes, yes, I would probably curse either internally or probably out loud. It would be a little
Yeah.
overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing come across here as well. Like I love all these anxiety noises. So what we're going to talk through today is ways that we can prepare, think in advance, build messaging libraries, build a response plan so that that first thought is like, okay, maybe I don't really want to, but I know I'm going to do amazing at this. I'm not going to say that we're going to talk through ideas that make this like something you're actually excited about. That'd be ideal, but I don't think we can get that far in an hour. But we can at least take you from like severe dread to some confidence and some comfort. So first of all, I want to define what public relations is. It is the strategic process of building mutually beneficial relationships with the people or organizations who can help you reach your business goals. And I think when we define it like this and we think about, what we do every day, we can see that as business owners, we would not be successful at all if we were not at least all a little bit engaged in this form of public relations, right? Like we can't build a successful business without providing mutual benefit. So this is something that we're all already doing. All we really do with PR is we stretch it, we take it at scale. So that's something we're going to be talking through today. If you have questions, feel free to pop in at any time or drop them in the chat. I'm very casual here. I want to share a couple statistics that speak specifically to the value of public relations. If this is not something that you're already focused on doing in an intentional way in your organization, hopefully this will get you to rethink that. So we know that public relations is 90% more effective than advertising when it comes to influencing consumers. And this, if you think about your own experience, it really bears it out. You can see that, if you see an ad for a restaurant that says we have the tastiest cheeseburger, you're gonna be like, okay, maybe. But if you read an article by a food critic that says I've tried every other cheeseburger in town and this restaurant has the best, you're much more inclined to go try it out. And that's kind of the difference. It's having that trusted lens share your message instead of really transparently you paying for a place to share your message. So when we can filter messages through that trusted source, then we're going to be a lot more influential. I also wanted to share that 96% of our B2B buyers want more content from industry thought leaders. And I think that this is a huge piece for introverts to know and be aware of. Like, there's so much noise out there. There's so many email news lists that you can be on. There are so many things on social. And with AI, it's so easy to put out a lot of words that say nothing. But you can stand out by being a subject matter expert in what you do and talking about what you're passionate about. And that will resonate with folks and help build the trust that you need to build your business. So I share the statistic to show that like you're not annoying anybody or you're not just making noise for the sake of adding more noise. People really do want to hear from the folks that they are going to work with. And then I also like to share this one. Stories are going to be 22 times more memorable than facts. Even though I just shared a bunch of facts, when we can tell stories, when we can relate, in a personal way, that's going to be a lot more easy to remember for folks. So we want to make sure that we're utilizing stories whenever we can. And I think as introverts, we have a really great hidden strength when it comes to this because we're always observing. Like we are collectors of stories. We're not always natural sharers of stories. But if we can start to think about that a little bit more intentionally of like, the stories that we gather and that we observe, just jotting them down so that you're starting to build that library will be great. So, normally, when we are talking about public relations planning and strategy, it's this whole process. We're going through, a huge planning phase, a huge research phase. We're really digging deep. But you can really boil it down to these answering these three questions for your organization. Or in your case, you can even make it more specific to what are your goals for attending this upcoming conference. So the three questions are: what are your goals, either for your business or for conference attendance? Who can help you achieve those goals? And how do you stay top of mind with those folks? So while PR planning can be very in depth, really it all boils down to having the answers to these three questions. As we're thinking about writing a PR plan and as we're thinking about tailoring it specifically for introverts, the ways that I do that are right up here on the screen. So I always build a message library as part of any PR plan, but like I said, it's particularly important for introverted folks to have this because we tend to freeze when the spotlight is on us. It can be really hard to remember even some of the most basic things about your own business when all eyes are on you and it makes you physically uncomfortable. But having that message library and having it rehearsed builds your muscle memory and allows you to be a little bit more confident and more comfortable when you're sharing it, even when you are up on stage or behind a microphone. We also, when we're building that PR plan, we're focused on the strengths of an introvert. So we are building into the plan a lot of what I call one-to-one to many media opportunities where we can showcase the strengths of introverts, which is building a one-on-one relationship and having a great one-on-one conversation and amplifying it to many people. Kind of going along with muscle memory, we're going to talk about ensuring media readiness for more traditional outlets. So feeling comfortable with the interview process. If that broadcast team is showing up in an hour, knowing that you know the basics of how to look polished and professional on camera. And then, as I've mentioned a couple of times, turning one win into many so that we are really getting the most bang for our buck on those media wins, because that way we don't have to have as many and we can relax and do our introverted thing and rest up. The first thing we're going to dig into is building this magical messaging library. So I've got a worksheet that Shadley will send around afterwards that will kind of walk you through a lot of what we're talking about today. But this piece is especially great as you prepare to attend a conference or any networking event. This formula is like my favorite thing. It really helps succinctly share what you do in a way that is really, really helpful for networking. So it's kind of Mad Lib style. So you can play around with some things, but it's I do a thing for a certain type of people by some special methods so that they have this amazing outcome. And what I really love about working and spending a couple minutes on this type of positioning statement is that lets the person you're talking to know upfront if you are somebody that they want to do business with. If they don't have a need for public relations, and I say I run a public relations company, okay, maybe we're not a fit, but I say I run it for small businesses and public health nonprofits, maybe they know somebody. So now we're just kind of building that connection. We also share the unique method that you use. So whatever your particular lens is that is your unique position in the market, your unique perspective, that's a great place to flag that. And then we always want to highlight the outcome. So it's not really about how we do the work with these people. It's about what they get as a result. So it's a great having a message like this that you practice, that you have a couple of versions of, can be really incredibly helpful because it's going to allow you to kind of start that conversation off in a way that will like naturally drive the conversation a little bit more. I like to say that this can be as poetic or as practical as you want it to be. So I would encourage you guys to, jot it down, try a couple different things, like have a couple different versions so that depending on where you're at with networking, or if you're doing an interview, then you've got a couple different choices to fit the different scenarios. And then we also going a bit deeper than that initial, like who you are and what you do. We want to have a couple different deeper messages. And this is going to be true again, either for networking or for media interviews. And having these things prepared is really, really great because again, it allows you to kind of think through it when you have your quiet space, when you are like charged up as an introvert and you're not trying to think on your feet. Because if there's one thing that like instantly makes me sweaty and itchy, it is trying to think on my feet. So being prepared is absolutely key. And this is all going to be in the worksheet that Shadley will send out. So it's a message building matrix. And the way it's set up is across the top, there's space for 3 topics, but maybe you have more, maybe you have less, depending on the opportunity in front of you. But for me, because my business is in public relations, I work with small businesses and I work with public health organizations. Those are kind of my 3 topics: public health, small businesses, and public relations. So really, really broad. And then under each topic, we fill out our 3-part messaging. And we use the acronym ACT because a good message, we really do want to be driving people to action. We want to have this be not just words we're saying for the sake of making noise, but for really building a relationship, driving action, getting some kind of change. So the A in this stands for awareness. So this is really about recognizing the status quo, recognizing where problems might lie for the person that you're talking to, or the target that you're trying to reach with a media interview. So this is a good place for a statistic. This is a good place to, recognize the pain point of your potential client and show an awareness of that. The C in this stands for credibility. So this is where we use a story to show what type of impact we've had in situations like this. Again, that story, that like real life example helps build your credibility, helps build trust, and can help move people forward in terms of working with you. So we want to have that piece in each of our messages. And then the last piece, the T stands for together. So that's not the greatest part of my acronym, but we're going to go with it. So together, here's how we move forward. So you want to make sure that you're leaving people, not just with showcasing your awareness of an issue and showing how you have fixed it in this one micro event, but also together, here's how we can do more of this. Here's how we can work together. So having those 3 pieces just kind of bulleted out before you go into a media interview or before you go to a networking event can really be helpful. I also recommend like physically practicing them. I don't have a slide for this, but I use a great tool called Yoodli, YOODLI.ai, I think. But it's a free tool that is really awesome. It lets you set up like some role playing, like to have a conversation with AI, and then it will offer feedback based on how smooth or fast or rambly you are. It can be a really great tool when you are a real introvert who's a little rusty on some of that networking stuff. So highly recommend that. And then the second way that we are tailoring public relations for introverts, as I mentioned earlier, is we're really focused on opportunities that harness our strengths. So a one-to-one to many type of situation, which when I talk about that, what I'm really talking about is guesting on podcasts, because what you're doing is you are having a one-on-one conversation with the podcast host. Their audience adores them, usually trusts them, like invites them into their ears every week or whatever. And you're getting great social proof. That person that they trust wants to talk to you for an hour, and you're able to leverage your amazing strengths as an introvert, like having just this nice one-on-one conversation with somebody. And then it's heard by thousands of people of you being at your best. So I love podcast guesting for introverted leaders. It is really important to, when you're considering pitching a podcast, to make sure that you're finding the right fit. So that, really boils down to making sure that the podcast audience matches the audience that you need to talk to. So if you remember back to when we were talking about those 3 questions that you ask to build a PR strategy, what are your goals, who can help you, and how do you stay top of mind with them? You want to make sure that the folks listening to this podcast are the people who can help you reach your goals. If not, that's kind of a waste of time. We want to also make sure that the tone and the style of the host is something that you're comfortable with. So if you are a very private and reserved introvert, going on a show where you know that the host does like a rapid fire, super personal question bit might not be a great fit for you, might not feel very comfortable. So we would want to avoid that. So just making sure that you match the energy of the host or that they match the energy that you're willing to bring. And then also that the format is one that you're comfortable with. A lot of podcasts will record with video just so that you can have that good conversation. Some of them post the video, some of them don't. So it's important to know that in advance so that you can, be in your jammies if it's possible or not, if it's going to be broadcast. So make sure that you understand that. And then some podcasts do record in person as well. So that might be an option, which is also really nice. And then when it comes to what you're actually pitching to the podcast, I like this formula for a really great place to start. So you're thinking about your expertise. What do you do in your business that makes you really unique? And then you're going to think about that podcast audience's biggest challenge. And in the Venn diagram of those two things, the area of overlap is where you find your pitch. So just really getting a little bit creative and thinking about some of the ways that you can, you're not going on, it's not a sales pitch, but just to kind of be able to share some stories, pull out some experiences that would speak to some of their audience's biggest challenge can be of great value to a podcast host. And moving on from podcasts, then we're going to talk about more traditional media and being comfortable and ready to do media interviews. Media readiness is absolutely huge. Like you can know your messaging and know your business backwards and forwards, but if you break out in a cold sweat when the cameras are rolling, it's not going to look good. Nobody's going to really hear the words that you're saying because it's just going to be making them nervous to watch you be so nervous. So when you are starting to formulate ideas around what to pitch to media, it's really important to ask yourself these two questions. The most important of which is it actually newsworthy? Hiring a new HR director, not really newsworthy, not going to pitch that to the media, but maybe, revamping some of your HR policies to include paid family leave and some really, innovative good stuff could be a little bit more newsworthy. So you want to make sure that you're asking yourself those questions about is it going to be something that I've seen in the news cover for other companies? We also want to make sure that when we're putting stories out there that it does drive to your organizational goals. So if you see, a media opportunity or you think of an idea to pitch a story out that's not directly tied to your organization's mission or the reason your business exists, then it's great to have press, but it's also kind of, it's not going to do anything for your business. They say, no press is bad press, but I tend to disagree when we're introverts because I think it can be really stressful. So I like to make sure that we are finding opportunities that really do drive towards the goals so we can be extremely focused in doing this. And then when it comes to what you're pitching for some more traditional earned media pitches, again, I start with the spokesperson, which is usually it's you, it's the leader of the company. Spokesperson is expertise plus a timely news story. And in the Venn diagram of those two things, that area of overlap is where we find our pitch. I recognize that this can be a very tricky thing when the news cycle is in a bit of a chaotic spot. So I did want to share some kind of tips that I have when it comes time to decide if your company wants to speak out on an issue or take a step back and not. I think it's really important to look at the core values of your company. If you value certain things that are hot button issues in the news right now and it's relevant to your mission, it's okay to speak out if you can respond with policy, with action, with the work that you're doing to combat that instead of an emotional reaction. And I think it's also really important to be extremely explicit for your stakeholders. So for any clients that you have or vendors or partners, being really clear on the values of your company is always a good idea. It's not always comfortable and it's not always something that is fun, but in times like these, I like to share this bit of advice on when to be loud or when to be quiet as we see a lot of different things popping up in the news. So next we're going to get really nitty gritty into what to do when you have a media opportunity. So let's say that you have come up with a great pitch for some traditional media or a podcast. I guess it doesn't really matter in this instance. You've come up with a great pitch. You've landed an interview. So what do we need to do now? The first thing is we really need to understand the logistics of the interview. We need to make sure that we understand the format, when it's happening, how much time we have to prepare, what types of visuals will be included. So if it's an online news article, do you need to supply a headshot, or are there other photos that you could send along? If it's going to be a broadcast media opportunity, where will you do the interview? And if it's a podcast, what will your background look like? That will really convey the strength of your brand and your organization. Again, we want to make sure that we understand the tone of the article, or the piece. Is this something that was spurred by, say, some controversial legislation or something happening locally, or is this more of a story about your expertise for a trade pub? So it really depends. So you want to make sure you understand that. You want to take a moment to remind yourself that as the subject matter expert, you will be asked questions, but you can also still control this conversation. So you want to be ready for that. And one way I like to do that is to make sure that you have a couple of phrases in your pocket that help you flag your brilliance. So saying things, giving the reporter or the audience cues that you're about to say something really smart, like the one thing I need you to remember, or the most important piece of this, is whatever. So just having some little phrases like that can be really helpful. Then once we know we've got an interview scheduled, we want to make sure that we're coming up with a new ACT framework, a new message matrix specifically for this opportunity. So what are the 3 topics that you would talk about during this media interview? And then filling in the awareness of the current issue, having an example story to build credibility, and then having together, here's how we move forward. There's some details on what that next step is. With that together, here's how we move forward. We want that to be consistent across all the topics. We only want to include one call to action in each media interview, because the chances of them all making it to air or in the article are very slim. And even if they do all get in there, it's going to be really confusing for the audience. So we want to make sure that we have just one call to action, just visit our website, or look for us in stores, or whatever that call to action is. We also want to make sure that as we're thinking through our messaging, that we are preparing for what I call the final question goldmine. At the end of 99% of media interviews I've ever been a part of, the reporter will say, is there anything else that I need to know? Or anything else you want to share? And this is a great opportunity for you to, if you haven't gotten to hit all of your key messages, like this is where you do that. Or if you've already hit them, this is a great second chance to reiterate those key messages, maybe in a way that's a little smoother. Maybe you do it better on the second take. But it's a great opportunity. So never say no to that question. Always be ready to have a succinct sentence about, kind of summing up what this conversation was and what your key points were. And then this next part is about leveraging everything. So I talked about turning one win into many. I think going through this, you can see that getting a media win is not always easy. It can take a lot of work, and executing it well can take a lot of work. So once we get those wins, we really, really want to amplify them as much as possible. And, just because we got a quote in the New York Times doesn't mean that all of our prospects have seen it. So we want to make sure they do. So this is a checklist to walk through when we've got these media wins. So we're going to go through it. We kind of think about all of our media in buckets of paid, earned, shared, and owned. So some ways that we can boost a media win through paid channels would be boosted social posts or targeted social media ads. There might be an opportunity for some marketing integration, which would be placing paid ads in the outlet where your earned media win was situated. This can be, if you have the budget, it can be a great way to make sure that your targeted prospects are seeing this great media win. I really do love to do some boosted social posts around client wins in the media, because you can get very specific with who sees it, who it's boosted to. And then turning one earned media win into more earned media wins is awesome. So, if you have a mainstream media win or a podcast guest episode some great places to extend that would be, making sure that you're linking to it in bios that you have of yourself or your subject matter expert, making sure that you're including links to that in other articles that they write. If it's a really top tier outlet, a great place to take it is alumni publications. So, a lot of universities love to keep tabs on successful graduates, and this is a great, a good quote in a national outlet is always a great thing for that. Again, if it was more mainstream, taking that same pitch or that hit or even just a link to a trade pub can be really helpful just for highlighting your expertise within your industry. And same for chambers and affinity groups. Again, these folks love to celebrate members who are doing awesome work. So sharing that among them is always a good idea. Then we've got shared media. And this is really what we think about when it comes to like borrowing the audience of our vendors, of our employees, our members. So what we want to supply when it comes to shared media is like a copy and paste option. So, hey, we were featured in the New York Times with this quote, and here's the link to it. I'd love it if you could share it. Having some copy, maybe even a graphic that folks could share on social or in email newsletters is really efficient. A lot of times, we all know that it's hard to feed the content beast, and usually these folks are pretty excited to get something that they did not have to draft themselves. So taking advantage of that, making it easy for folks to share is really helpful. And then the biggest piece of this pie is really the owned channels. So making sure that when you do secure a media win, that you're, putting it on your business's media page, that you're including a link to it in the newsletter, that you're sharing it internally with employees, across social, blog, if you do an annual report, all these things that your company puts out, really creating this list of places that would be appropriate to share some of these third-party media wins, and then just kind of working that list. So building that, it's going to look different for everybody, but it's a really great tool to have, and then you're not recreating the wheel each time. So again, the 4 ways that we take kind of your standard PR plan and tailor it for introverts. It's all about that message library and building the muscle memory of sharing those messages so that feels comfortable and comes out smooth. Focusing on the one-to-one to many media opportunities so that we can leverage the strengths that we introverts have when it comes to building those one-on-one relationships as opposed to being a voice in a group. We want to make sure that we are ready for media opportunities by just taking a moment to plan those messages, understanding a little bit about how we come across on camera and practicing whenever we get a chance when we have that time, and turning one win into many so that we can have a really robust presence without having to actually be out there doing interviews all the time and getting exhausted. So that's really how we make public relations accessible for introverts, and how we do it with them in mind. I've got my contact information here. I'd love to, answer any questions that you guys have. I know we've got about 20 minutes left here. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I had the idea as you were talking about the PR piece, reaching out to media, I think, where I guess I'm trying to figure out or trying to imagine how you can apply those skills when you're pitching. Like, we have a lot of agency owners who are looking at new clients and new business opportunities. And for introverts, that can be incredibly exhausting and stressful to have to put yourself out there as an agency of note. And so, but it feels like a lot of these same tools apply, and a lot of these same skills you can use. Obviously, you're not going out to talk to media, but if you're talking to the head of a big organization, you're going after a big client, that can be overwhelming for introverts, even though they recognize that it's part of business growth. So can you talk a little bit about how you could see reapplying some of these exact same skills, but you're not going out to talk to the press, you're going out to talk to the president of the biggest client you could potentially take on?
Yeah, that is absolutely intimidating. And again, I think it really comes down to, again, that planning piece. So making sure that you've got, obviously we all practice, right? Like these pitches and these conversations before we go have the conversations, but really having it planned. you know what stories you're going to share, you know what ideas and like what imagination you'll spark in the owner of that company to get them to see how their future could be if they hired your agency. I think practicing that is really, really key. And, it's okay. You don't, I think it's also really important to note that we don't have to emulate extroverts to do a good job. It's okay to still be yourself, but when you have those messages practiced and you have everything pre-thought out about what you want to say and you've really ingrained it in your mind that you know exactly how you talk about your company, you know exactly how you're going to talk about this potential campaign that you could do with this prospect, it's just going to come across a lot smoother than if you let the fear of all those eyeballs on you or that set of eyeballs on you take over. So I'm a huge advocate of practicing and pre-planning messaging because I think it definitely helps in the delivery because like I said, you can have the best idea in the whole world, but if you're sweaty and weird, it's not going to land.
Right. Um, I would be curious, obviously, turning the spotlight on a group of introverts is a highly high risk of being completely ignored, but I would be curious to hear from anybody about a particular challenge as an introvert that this might help address, or if there's, or I would love to open up to a conversation. You can either drop it in the chat, you can feel free to unmute yourself. I'm fascinated by the introverted leadership piece, so I would love to hear from anyone that has anything to ask or to add.
It's all good if not. I have some resources too that I thought might be nice to share. I'm sure some of us are familiar with some of these books on this list, but if you haven't read Quiet by Susan Cain, and you identify as an introvert, I highly recommend it. It's just such a good reframe of the strengths and the power that we have in a world that's super, super loud. That's a really great one. The Introvert's Edge by Matthew Pollard there's an introvert's edge for sales and there's an introvert's edge for networking. So if you I think there's an audiobook of that one if you need to like cram on your way to a conference or a networking event, that's really great. It's got some great conversation starters and like just strategies for conversations to help you feel a little bit less awkward. So I'm a huge fan of that. Let's see, I've included the Udly here, which again is the AI tool for having some conversations and getting it just right so that you are practicing in the safety of your own private space instead of with another human, which can be scary.
There is a note from Laura Williams. She added that she likes the preparation piece and that she pretends to be an extrovert when she needs to be, and but planning, you have to plan recovery as an introvert. So, and then Jules asks, how do you deal with back-to-back meetings and it is draining you?
Yeah, that's horrible. I wish I had a better answer for it, but I think knowing when when you can look at your calendar for the week and you know like, oh my gosh, Tuesday is going to be back to back to back, like give yourself if you can Wednesday or Tuesday night to like really just melt into the puddle that we all know really well after like all that socialization or listening. It's just a lot of input. So if you can't have that space in your workday, making space for it before you transition to like real life after work is really, really important. Yeah, Jules, you know the puddle. So yeah, I mean, that's that's how I manage it. I am a miser with my schedule. So making sure that unless it's absolutely unavoidable, just not letting myself have days like that. Like I send out, my scheduling link and there's lots of bits blocked because I know I need that and I know I'm going to do a better job if I've got some quiet time in my brain.
Right, right.
I was just okay. So I was reading from Bricks Branding about producing weekly content on social media. I'm assuming that you mean those are weekly videos, which is really tricky. And kudos to you for recognizing the value in that. I think, when it comes to that feeling awkward, I find that I feel really awkward when I don't feel like I'm saying anything of value when I'm just making noise or content just to make noise or content. So again, uh, going back to like pre-planning, like what are the goals? Why are you making social media content every week? And what topics are resonating a lot with your audience? And driving the type of action that you want, really drilling down on some of those things. So if you find that, a discussion of like color that you use in your brand template really got a lot of people going, like go deep into it, get really in the weeds and see where that takes you. It's always a lot easier for us introverts to like get into a flow state when we're talking about something we're passionate about. So letting yourself get there and finding a way to do that can be really freeing and kind of help you feel a little less unstuck, I think.
Will Ricco had said earlier, my biggest challenge is that external communication takes a lot of energy and I need to be in the right state of mind. I also overanalyze what I'm saying, so it adds a lot of time to the effort.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one way, because we all do get really over analytical of every word, but when you have it pre-planned and you can take that, take as much quiet space as you need in advance to really map out the messages that you share, the messages that your organization shares, and like you get to feel good about it in advance, then you practice it, you get that muscle memory, and you don't find yourself having to second guess it as much because it's not like you're saying something totally different every time. You're just working the script that you've written for yourself.
Right, right. Heather has an interesting question about what about when you're pitching with a team of extroverts who don't require as much prep and recovery as you do? How do you address it without seeming needy?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. Heather, are those intro or extroverts on your own team? You mean like you guys are building a pitch together?
Yeah, like we might have varying roles within the pitch, but yeah, we're working on it at the same time. We're going into the pitch together. And there's just a couple people that are a little more fly by the seat of their pants than I would prefer, or even like some of my direct reports also require more preparation than even I do sometimes. So I try to be really sensitive to that as a manager. But how can I get other people in the organization to allow us to have the space that we need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tricky one. I would recommend really framing it in terms of the success of the pitch because you are all on the same team. You want to have a great showing. You want to have it lead to new business, and the best way to ensure that is to make sure that the whole team feels really good about it. So if they're going to fly by the seat of their pants, okay, how can we plan for that and make sure that, you and your folks have your message points down, know your roles, know how to kind of let that spontaneity live in its container. I know that's really hard to do, but if there's a way to kind of just like say, okay, and then Steve's going to talk for 5 minutes about the web piece, and like the basics, but Steve can kind of go on his own. I don't know. I think that that might be the best way to handle it. I have not really been in that situation very many times. As I am an agency owner of one with no team. So so if I don't like the way I'm working with myself, I take a nap.
I love that answer. Thank you very much.
We have about 10 minutes left if anyone else wants to jump in. I will take this time to say thank you to Alexson for joining us today. It's been fantastic. I will not have a webinar in 2 weeks from now because I will be at BABA. Again, I hope to see many of you there. Please come up and say hello. This is kind of an odd, we do need an introvert table at BABA. That's what I said last year to Drew, or even our own little room. I said, can't we just have one of these side rooms be someplace where the introverts can just go and recharge and we're not even going to turn the lights on? So I very much agree that it would be awesome to have a getaway corner for the introverts to either talk to each other or not. So yes, I very much agree. Again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. I think we're going to close it down a few minutes early so you can get your 5 to 8 minutes of breathing room before you jump into whatever is next for you, my lovely introverted friends. So everyone have a great day, and we will see you the next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.